Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. Just a short one this morning, just over 10 minutes on helpful hacks. We'll get straight into it, and as usual, if you have any questions, we'll putter at those at the end.
Welcome to today's tutorial. Let's get started. Today we are looking at some helpful hacks or tips when working with the Horner OCS. First we'll show and describe the hack, and then we'll give you any necessary details so you can implement it yourself. So what do we mean by a hack in this webinar? By that we mean any out of the ordinary approach you can use to make things easier or better with your system. Hacks often involve using different parts than you normally would, or putting them together in a different way than you normally would to achieve a result that you're looking for. Today we're focusing on hacks or tips that will make wiring easier and ones that should make things better when you're working on the OCS at your desk or in the lab. Our first hack is with CSCAN wiring for SmartRail and SmartStix I/O. So this happens to be a 16-point relay output SmartStix, and this is a SmartRail CSCAN base with some I/O modules attached. And these products are as you would receive them from the factory. Now imagine that you have an OCS, let's say mounted in the door that's driving this I/O, and you'll have a CSCAN cable coming in and landing, let's say here on the SmartStix, and you'll have a short segment of CAN cable that's running from this SmartStix over to the SmartRail. Then if this is the end of the line, you'll have a termination resistor here. Then whether it's on one of these two nodes or maybe on the OCS side, you'll have to land 24 volt DC power because both of these products require 24 volt DC power from the network in order to function. With these plugs that we've included here, this is all possible, but it will take some effort and care because we have multiple conductors in each of these terminals on these plugs. So this first hack we'll show you is with our CSCAN double plug. Let's see what happens if we install CSCAN double plugs instead of the standard single plugs. The first thing you'll notice is it hasn't increased the footprint much, if at all, for the SmartRail, and maybe by a few millimeters for the SmartStix. Now though, wiring is a lot easier. We still have our cable coming in from the OCS on the door. It has its own dedicated set of terminals here to land. The short segment of CAN cable from here to here again has its own dedicated terminals. And then we still have a set of terminals over here to land DC power and to install our termination resistor. So that's a cleaner and easier way of doing that. Again, keep in mind that the double plugs are standard on the XL Series OCS from the XL4 up, and it's also standard on SmartBlock I/O. However, it's a great option for SmartStix and SmartRail. Let's go to the next hack, which has to do with CSCAN network wiring inside the control panel. So let's turn our attention back to CSCAN. One common question we get is if you have the OCS in the door and then maybe one expansion base on CSCAN, do you really need to run down 2 or 3 meters of special CAN cable, and is there any alternatives to that? Well, the answer is yes, there is an alternative. So if all that you're doing is going to be running within your panel, there's nothing wrong with using category cable, such as Cat5 or Cat6 for example, between your OCS and your I/O base. Unshielded is also perfectly fine. So here I'm showing just standard category cable, and with category cable you only need a few conductors. We'll talk about which ones in the next segment. So I'm using this double plug here, which means I have a dedicated location to land my power wiring, because remember, we don't want to run our DC power to power the I/O block from the category wiring. We want to do that with a couple of separate conductors. And this double plug makes it really easy. Again, there's nothing wrong with using category wiring to make that connection if your network never leaves your enclosure. It's obviously a lot cheaper, and if you happen to have a micro OCS product that has an RJ45 connection for CAN, that makes it even better, because now you can either take a pre-wired RJ45 patch cable and just cut off part of it to terminate on the I/O side, Or if you're comfortable in making your own category cables, you can put these styles of connectors on them. So now in the next segment we'll look at what the restrictions are, but if your network never leaves the enclosure, category cable as CAN wiring works well. So typically you'll want to use unshielded LAN cabling. That's usually the easiest to work with. And within your control panel, generally there's no need for shielding. You can safely use category wiring inside the control cabinet with 8 drops or less. You should continue to use standard termination or the terminators that are included in the package with your OCS. So you should continue to use those 120 ohm resistors, even though the resistance of category cabling is typically 100 ohms. Some additional details to note is that there are only really 3 conductors that are needed when you're using Cat5, Cat5e, Cat6, etc. with CSCAN. And those are the communications pair, which is the orange pair, and then the green-white conductor, which is used for V- because you still need a common. Those 3 conductors are all you need. Occasionally, companies will utilize category wiring for the V+ power connector, and that, when it happens, goes over pin 4, which is the blue conductor. Next, let's look at connecting traditional twisted pair serial wiring to modular jacks. This can come into play for most of our products. Here I'm showing an X5. And just on the X5 we have Ethernet, CAN and serial ports that utilize the modular jack. Now most of you will know we can use patch cables or standard Ethernet cabling for Ethernet. We just looked at how you can also use category cabling for CAN. Most don't use category cabling for serial ports however. Usually you would use a dual twisted pair with an overall shield or something similar for serial type connections. So customers often ask, how do you get cables like this plugged into a connector like that? The answer to that is the Horner modular adapter. This takes modular type connections and transforms them over to a terminal strip. So you just plug that in and then you have screw terminals available for your modular jack. So as mentioned, that's great for adapting your traditional dual pair shielded serial cable to a modular jack and can be used with all OCS as they all use modular jacks for serial ports. Next we'll look at working on your XL Series OCS at your desk. If you have DIN rail available either in your desk area or in the lab and you're working on an XL Series OCS, you've likely taken advantage of the DIN rail mechanical latch that's at the back of nearly all XL Series OCS that have I/O built in. However, the products in the XL series that are above 4 inches in size are not designed for permanent mounting on DIN rail. So for an XL4 and also for the XLE and XLT, which are in the same package, their DIN rail latch is designed to permanently mount them on DIN rail if that's what you want to do. But if you have an EXL6, an XL7 or an EXL10, you don't want to permanently mount that on the DIN rail latch. But when it's in your desk or in the lab and the DIN rail is handy, there's nothing wrong with using that. For those of you who don't have DIN rail in your desk area and you want to keep an XL Series OCS in place for example, one thing that's useful is this thick acrylic double-sided tape. With this stuff you can just cut off a piece of it, attach it to the back of whatever gear you're working on and put it where you want to put it and it'll stay there. And then when you're ready to get rid of it, all you do is a twisting action and that object that's taped down will come up easily and doesn't leave any trace. Sometimes you can have a problem with cabling or wiring that's being disorderly and you want to tape it down temporarily to keep it steady. Another good option here is this gaffer's tape. This is a lot like duct tape, but it doesn't have any of the issues with leaving residue when you take it off. And it comes off a lot easier than duct tape, even though it holds things in place well. So take advantage of the DIN rail if you can, and if not, you can use those tape options to keep your desk area in order. Finally, let's look at a micro OCS desk arrangement option. You may notice that a lot of the time when demonstrating our products with the micro OCS series, our demonstration system utilizes an overhead camera. One of the qualities of the micro OCS is that it has all its wiring connections for I/O power and networking, etc. on the back. So with an overhead camera here, we need to keep the micro OCS steady on the table for the webinar, even when we have a lot of wires connected. So what I've done here is mounted what they call furniture leveling glides on the bottom of the micro OCS. What we're using here are these flange nuts, and of course there's no drilling involved here. These are just 1/4 flange nuts, and they're stuck to the plastic on the back of the micro OCS with this acrylic no trace sticker, which you can get from Amazon. This has worked really well even when we have a lot of I/O wiring and network wiring connected. So you could use this if you have a micro OCS and you have a wire to the back of it that's not staying put, and then you can keep it up off your desk and keep it steady while you do your testing. If it's not staying exactly where you want it, you could use some more of these acrylic no trace stickers to keep those leveling guides in exactly the place that you want them. So if you want to try that solution for keeping wires under control under your micro OCS at your desk, then here's what you will need. You can get these furniture leveling glides online, which are made by 3M. And you shouldn't have any trouble finding 1/4 flange nuts, which would be available from your local hardware store. Then the acrylic no trace double-sided adhesive stickers you can order online or on Amazon, and they are made of the same material as that roll of thick acrylic tape that we looked at before. These ones are just pre-cut out in circles and they're not as thick, but they do the job quite well. So that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you for joining us, and the Q&A session will begin shortly.
Okay, a nice short one this morning. So if you want to look back on that, as usual, the past webinars will all be on the webinar section of our website. Next week we have using Gmail with the Horner OCS, so the updated steps to get Gmail functional again. I haven't seen anything come in as yet, so I hope that was of use to you, and we shall leave it there for today. We hope to see you again next week.